Today, I'm walking around my office with an extra spring in my step. Unbeknownst to my rigidly constructed employees, this is a direct result of my first experience yesterday with DiPT. Despite an excellent mental set and a comfortable setting, I'm always a bit nervous my first time with any substance. I mean, even though my sample came from a reputable supplier, who really knows what is in the package? I certainly don't have the resources to get an independent evaluation, no matter how prudent such a step might be. So, once again, I threw caution to the wind and set about my day by weighing out a relatively conservative 26 milligram of the white flour-like substance on my precision scale. My faithful girlfriend sat nearby, reading aloud various DiPT experience reports, which is my preferred method of preparation for a new experience. Few available reports were as varied in nature as the dosages administered, but one thing seemed clear. A 25 milligram dose was less than likely to present any significant problems. Rarely do I have a trip that doesn't come with a certain amount of discomfort. The first 2 to 3 hours I had the usual body shakes, the irritability, the aching joints, and the raw feeling throughout my belly and intestines. And as I sallied around my apartment determined to pretend that I wasn't uncomfortable, I found myself once again asking the question, why the hell do I do this to myself? In a roundabout response to my question, I took 0.5 milligrams of alprazolam in 0.25 sublingual milligram doses to help calm the negative effects. So although I was feeling sick, and that is a relevant point to be made in any experience report, I wanted to get that out of the way first, because it was not a dominating characteristic of the experience, and it almost completely subsided by the 3-hour mark. The rest of the trip is the focus of this report, and my overall experience was nothing short of outstanding. I took a shower within a half hour of dosing and noticed the first alerts come on as the water rushed over me. A slight lightheadedness and speedy stimulation were present. Returning to the living room, I had an all-over body flush as if I were coming up on MDMA, no doubt initiated partially by the shower. The leaves on the trees outside were blowing in the wind, and they appeared to be moving as if slightly sped up on fast-motion film. The effect was subtle, and otherwise my vision was normal. At 45 minutes, I checked in with my girlfriend, who was making some lunch in the kitchen, and I was both surprised and delighted to hear my voice had attained a distinct lowering in pitch.
She responded with a similar effect on her voice, as if she might have grown taller and broader, and I was now conversing with an Amazon woman.
I digress for a moment to say that apart from the sickness, both physical and psychological changes were minimal throughout the duration of the experience, although there were subtle visuals. While sitting on the toilet gazing at the floor tiles, the speckled surface was swirling not unlike a low dose of mushrooms, but the effect was only noticeable while staring. I felt slightly confused at times, but all in all I felt quite normal. I was able to assist a neighbor in loading a large TV into his car without incident, albeit strange sounding. I feel I could have driven in an automobile, but as stated in Shulgin's glossary of terms, that would have defined me as an idiot. The aural distortions were thoroughly fascinating. I am an amateur musician, and music has always been a focal point in my life, so I took great pleasure in sitting back and analyzing my condition. Lower tones were distinctly embellished, sounding warmer, fuller, and layered with harmonic tones, while higher tones seemed to be relatively unaffected. If you have ever heard an electric instrument, such as a guitar played through an octaver, that was almost precisely the effect. The primary tone was intact, but there were several lower harmonic and melodic tones resonating at the same time. After a time, I decided to test out the DiPT Salvia combo. I'll keep this short because the results were unremarkable. Salvia often has profound effects on my nervous sense. Sound loses all meaning as it becomes a landscape rather than a sense, a dimensional shape rather than a vibration. Sound loses all meaning as it becomes a landscape rather than a sense, a dimensional shape rather than a vibration. I took several massive ego-dissolving blasts of salvia over the course of an hour, going in and out of the peak of experience 4 times, and I was unable to detect any measurable differences in effects. My feeling is that the salvia experience is so powerful in itself that the subtle effects of DiPT are all but lost or void. After shaking off the effects of the salvia and returning to my sound-shifted but relatively normal world, we spent the last of the afternoon with some friends over dinner. I was able to function and socialize perfectly well, and had fun continuing my observations while satisfying a voracious appetite with a dinner of free-range chicken and garlic mashed potatoes. I also noticed that if I spoke quietly, my own voice sounded very
Deep and science fiction-like. But if I raised my voice, not in my pitch but in volume,
the effect was less noticeable. I suspect that as I raise my volume, higher frequencies are more dominant and changes are therefore less obvious. The magnitude of this audio effect had slowly increased, peaking subjectively around the 2.5 hour mark. It remained quiet constant for about 4 hours and very, very slowly tailed off from there.
it was much milder but still pronounced when I went to bed at 9:30 p.m., full 9 hours after ingestion. This morning it was barely noticeable, but noticeable nonetheless at 7:30 a.m. It is now lunchtime and I am surely baseline.
There was no uncomfortable come down or the usual cracked out feeling I have after most trips, and I slept like a baby all night, awaking refreshed and more than a little excited about what I had experienced. DiPT just might be the ultimate dream drug for the musician or the sound nut. Some might only find it mildly amusing, but I'm really into music and sound, so I found it absolutely astonishing and delightful. It is an oral toy box of ear-tickling proportions. As I said, during the come-up I asked myself the question, why the hell do I do this to myself? A day later, I can answer that question with the same answer I always arrive at. Because psychedelics remind me of how transient and ethereal this reality is. At any moment, we are only a raindrop away from death, and the things we think to be absolute are really nothing more than figments of our own imagination. Each time I return to Earth, I feel profoundly thankful for the world I live in, for the life I have, and for the 5 senses I have been gifted with. Psychedelics remind me never to forget these things. Call it what you want. I find God in various powders and plants. Today, once again, I feel much more grounded, and I know I will venture forth to leave this ground for higher consciousness again and again and again.